Lesson 6 is on finding an equation for a line given 2 points. This is going to be very similar to what we did in lesson 5 when we were given a slope and we had to find the y-intercept. Now we're not going to be given a slope. We're only going to be given 2 points. But we do already have this formula that you might remember seeing in the last unit. So slope is the change in the y's divided by the change in the x's. So we take y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Given 2 points and no graph paper, we're going to be able to find the equation of a line. We're going to find the slope first, then we're going to solve for b and find the y-intercept and then write the equation. So this just takes one extra step at the beginning of this question. So it's lots of algebra. It's solving equations and just trying to get the equation of a line. Remember, I need an m and a b. That's all we need. Y equals mx plus b. We need an m and a b, and we're happy, and we'll be able to find the equation of the line. So for example 1, a line passes through 1, 2, and 5, 10. Find an equation for the line. So we are looking for the slope first. So remember, our formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And being accurate is pretty important. It goes x1, y1, x2, y2. So we would take 10 minus 2 over 5 minus 1. So 10 minus 2 over 5 minus 1. That gives you 8 divided by 4, or a slope of 2. So it's going to be a lot easier if you can divide 8 divided by 4 is 2, then use the 2. So now when I go to find my equation for my line, I have this formula, y equals mx plus b. I know that the slope is going to be 2. So I already have that figured out. Now I need to find the b. So what we were doing in our last lesson is using a point for x and y. This is kind of weird now though, because you have 2 points. So you actually have 2 to choose from. You have to pick one. It doesn't matter at all because they are both on the line. So it's not going to mess you up if you use 5, 10 or if you use 1, 2. What I usually do is I pick the ordered pair that looks a little easier to use. So smaller numbers or less negative signs or something, I think 1, 2 would be easier. So remember that I have to sub in the 2 for the y, and the x is a 1, and I'm going to be able to find my b. So I'd multiply 2 times 1, that's 2. But then when I move the 2 to the other side, it's going to look like 2 minus 2, so I actually get a y-intercept of 0. And that's okay. I'm able to find my equation of my line then because I know the slope is 2. And I could write plus 0, but normally when we have a y-intercept of 0, it would just look like y equals 2x. So we're going to practice this, and hopefully for homework you will look at the homework questions and you will do lots of practice. It's one thing just to watch me do these, but it's another thing, you learn so much more when you practice them yourself. You can look at it and say, oh, that looks easy, but I mean, your accuracy gets better with practice, and your understanding will really improve when you practice this on your own. So a line passes through -3, -2, and 6, -8. Find an equation for the line. Some students, it's kind of funny, this is what they'll do. They'll draw this graph paper in, and they'll like, okay, I'm gonna draw this graph paper, and I'm gonna graph this. Usually it's a pretty good hint that if there's no graph paper provided, we want you to do this algebraically. So find an equation for the line. So we need the slope first. When we think about y equals mx plus b, we don't have an m and we don't have a b, so we're really stuck. We don't have anything to get started. So we have to find the m first. So when I look at my 2 points, I'm going to do -8 minus -2 and 6 minus -3. Some of you notice now, if this is going to be minus -2, I don't mind at all if you just wrote that as -8 plus 2 right from the start. And this would be 6 minus -3. So what I'm saying is if you had have just written this like -8 plus 2 and 6 plus 3, because you know two negatives side by side make a positive, that would be just fine. It saves you a little bit of work. So -8 plus 2, that's -6, and 6 plus 3, that is 9. If you can reduce this to lowest terms, then you should reduce it. So I can divide the top by 3 and the denominator by 3 to make that -2/3. It's just going to be easier to work with a slope that is smaller. Just like up in the other example, if you had 8/4 and you sub that in as a fraction, would have been a lot easier just to use the 2 instead of if I had have subbed in 8/4. That's a lot harder to work with. So now I have a formula, y equals mx plus b. I know my m is -2/3, but I need to know what the b is. So here again, I don't know which of these points looks easier to use, but we get to just pick one. I don't know which one looks easier. What if we use -3, -2 for x and y? Lots of negatives, but -2 is subbed in there, and the -3 is the x, so it feels very backwards when you go to sub it in, because you start with this number here at the front. And then remember our fractions, if we multiply our numerators together, we get 6. 6 divided by 3 is 2. I'm going to move the 2 to the left, so it's -2 minus 2. So that's -4. So I found my equation. I would have gotten -4 if I had have used the other ordered pair as well. It is on the line. They are both points are on the line. So you're going to get the same y-intercept no matter which point you pick. So our final equation is y equals -2/3. So our final equation is y equals -2/3 x minus 4. A few more here. They have a little twist to them though. So a line has an x-intercept of 3 and a y-intercept of 4. Oh, so they already told us what the b is, but they didn't tell us what the slope is. They told us what the x-intercept is. All right, how is that useful? How are we going to get our equation? So find an equation for the line. I know the x-intercept, if it's 3, that means that's the point 3, 0. And the y-intercept, if it's 4, that's 0, 4. So imagine on a graph, if this is x and this is y, 0, 4 is a y-intercept because I go 0 sideways and up 4. And 3, 0 is an x-intercept because it's on the x-axis. So without graphing though, how are we going to find an equation for the line? We already know what the b is. How are we going to find the m? So same thing, we'd want to use our slope formula to find the m. So again, some students will struggle with this question because they'll be like, how do I use this 3? Well, remember that 3, an x-intercept of 3 is actually an ordered pair. And a y-intercept of 4 is actually an ordered pair. I have 2 points, and then I'm able to find the slope. So 4 minus 0 over 0 minus 3, that gives me 4 over -3, or -4/3. But now my work is kind of done. I don't need to sub a point in and find the b. They've already told me it's the y-intercept is 4. So I can just write my equation. Y equals -4/3 x plus 4 is my y-intercept. Part D, a line passes through the origin and a point 4, 6. Write an equation for the line. So no graph paper, we are not going to graph it. We have to figure out what this means. So if a line passes through the origin, that's the center of the Cartesian plane. So that's 0, 0. And it goes through another point 4, 6. So write an equation for the line. Imagine a line passes through the origin. Imagine that there's this line and it passes through 4, 6 and it passes through the origin. What do you think the y-intercept is if my line comes down like this and it goes right through the origin of the graph? So the y-intercept, the b is going to be 0. We already know that if the line goes through 0, 0, that must be the y-intercept. So again, we just have to find the slope. We do have 2 points, so we have 4, 6, and we have 0, 0. So 6 minus 0 over 4 minus 0, that gives us 6 over 4, or 3 over 2. I'm not making these into decimals like 1.5. I really always like a rise and a run if I have one. So I might just leave that as 3 over 2. If you made it 1.5, I'm not going to be too upset, but it's really nice to see slope written as a fraction or just as an integer. So when we go to write our equation for this one, y equals mx plus b, we found our slope and we know the y-intercept is 0. So we can just go ahead and finish our equation right now. We could write plus 0, but usually we would just leave that as y equals 3 over 2x. Okay, last example has a little twist at the end. So a line passes through -2, -4, and 4, -1. So I'm given 2 points again, same old thing. Lots of algebra to find our answer. Find an equation for the line written in standard form. So I wanted to just kind of remind you of what that was. Remember, standard form wasn't y equals mx plus b, but it was written so that all of the terms were on the left side or the right, but all of the terms are all together, and then it equals 0. And the x term comes first, and then the y term, and then the number. So what if we just went ahead and started our slope formula? So we have -1 minus -4. So I'm doing the y2 minus the y1. And then the x2 minus the x1 would be 4 minus -2. So if you didn't want to write all that out, you could have just written that as -1 plus 4 divided by 4 plus 2. It looks so much easier instead of 2 negatives side by side. So what would we get? We'd get 3 over 6. And that's the same thing as 1 over 2. I like 1 over 2 a little better because it's just in lowest terms and the numbers are a little smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and just start my equation for my line. I'm going to go ahead with y equals mx plus b. I know the slope is 1/2. Same old thing as on the front of the page. I'm going to pick up one point or the other. It doesn't matter. What if I pick the second point this time? So the y is -1. The x is 4. Remember that if I'm picking this point, then I pick the x and the y both from that same point. And then I try and simplify it. 4 times 1 is 4, divided by 2, that's 2. Move the 2 to the left, so that'd be -1 minus 2. So that's -3. So I have an m and I have a b, so I can write my equation for my line. Now that I know the slope is 1/2 and the b is -3. So the only extra thing to this question is it said, write this in standard form. So I want all of these terms on the left. Let's move all of the terms to the left first. So then the 1/2 x becomes negative, the y is already there, and the -3 moves over, so it has to become positive, and then it equals 0. And this looks more like standard form. Now, something else we talked about, remember thinking that because there's a negative here at the front, that we really care about this a value at the front, and it can't be negative. So if we multiply the whole line by -1, this fraction would become positive 1/2 x. The y would become negative, and the 3 would become negative. So now it looks a lot more like standard form. I realize we already had an equation up here that was in slope y-intercept form, but we're trying to get this into standard form because that's what this question's asking for. So if I have a fraction at the front and my a value is a fraction, that's also not proper standard form. So I would imagine multiplying this term by 2, and this term by 2, and this term by 2, and this term by 2. I'm allowed to do that as long as I multiply every term on the left and the right by the same value. These two 2's cancel out, so I just have x minus 2y minus 6 equals 0. And that is my equation of the line in standard form.